Okay, so uh, thank you very much. Welcome to this webinar. Has been brought to you by Blue Circular Economy, and this particular project is funded by the Northern Periphery and Arctic Programme of the European Union, and its prime focus is on Northern Europe, and particularly working with SMEs and others to develop new business opportunities. But we open these webinars to a wider audience. The Blue Circular Economy project builds on a very successful award-winning project called Circular Ocean, and this ran for 3 years prior to this project. So again, all new entrants to the workshop, please remain muted. So this project, Blue Circular Economy, builds on that first Circular Ocean project. What I'm going to do in this workshop is to run through various emerging issues and really then focus on a number of practical issues about how to drive new business opportunities from waste fishing nets. The webinar is broken down into some key sections, and at the end of each section, there is an opportunity to ask questions in the chat box. And indeed, if you have questions or thoughts that come to mind when I'm speaking, just add them to the chat box, and then I'll pick that up at those different breaks. And again, if you want to save any questions to the end, there'll be some opportunities at the end to pick up those questions as well. So, so the workshop is really around how you potentially can convert that waste fishing gear. And again, because this is a new topic, new things emerge all the time in this area, and it's both for gear for so-called fin fish and also shellfish, aquaculture. Each produce its own gear to catch, shell or fin fish, and a lot of that is either being dumped in oceans, either going to landfill or being incinerated throughout the world. And a lot of our focus in this project builds on some more horizontal work we did, particularly historically around eco-innovation, and a series of projects we were involved in, which culminated in a booklet called Eco-Innovate that had over 60,000 downloads. Within the Circular Ocean project, we took a number of those lessons and developed another specific booklet on eco-innovation and waste fishing gear, which is a useful accompaniment to this webinar. And we particularly drew on a number of projects that that we work with micro or small SMEs in the past, more broadly on eco-innovation. So if you were to hunt down the Circular Ocean website or email me after this session, I can then send you a link to various reports that are available from the past. So basically what we've seen over the last sort of 5-6 years is growing concerns around waste plastic in the oceans, marine plastic, marine litter, a lot of terminology, particularly a lot of focus around packaging. But fishing gear has become a growing and perhaps more silent part of this, but it is both a problem in the sea through so-called ghost gear, but also being dumped on piers, harbour sides, but also ending up in landfill. And from research we completed in the past in Scotland, Ireland, Norway, and Greenland, we found that the nylon nets were generally moving because there was a market for the nylon, but the polypropylene and polyethylene were problematic materials. And a lot of these were contaminated and were often stored and I use the word loosely, stored at harbours or harbour sides or port areas, simply because there was no clear waste management route. As many of you will know, there was the passing in Europe of in the end of March of the Single-Use Plastics Directive. That was then recently followed up by some similar legislation in Canada that effectively is looking to put bans on certain single-use plastics. But the area that some people are not so aware of is there are proposals in this legislation, and it is legislation, it is passed, to set up producer responsibility scheme in Europe or in each member state around fishing gear. And a lot of the basis of this particular directive is around the legal basis was formed in the electronics directive. However, I believe there are, apart from the products, a number of fundamental differences between fishing gear and electronics. And those include, electronics are, in a sense, a national issue. They're sold nationally. The waste fishing nets, which is what the producer responsibility scheme will focus on, it will focus on the responsibilities for the manufacturers and assemblers of the nets, not the users, not the fishermen. So that is a very fragmented system and often located around ports. And there are a number of other significant differences in the regulations that still have to be worked out. That also include, when the regulations for electronics came in, the sort of systems were pretty well known for the various electronic products. But in fishing gear, there isn't well-organized statistics. Certainly in waste fishing gear, there is not well-organized statistics. And there's a lack of cooperation between manufacturers and assemblers in Europe from experience we've had. So what is the challenge? Well, some UN figures that are often quoted from 2009, quoted from 10 years ago, that 640,000 tons of nets and ropes, etc., are discarded in the sea annually, which represents about 10% of the ocean-placed waste plastic. However, we found in the previous project with colleagues from the Norwegian Technical University that these figures were based on a lot of assumptions, and they were perhaps not so reliable, yet they are often quoted. What we found by looking at a wider literature search is that by weight, there are claims to say that fishing nets and ropes can be from 10%, according to those UN figures, but right up to 70%. So we're in a classic sort of situation by that range of variation and uncertainty, that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So there's a real lack of clarity over the data. And this is perhaps one of the reasons so far that the European Commission haven't set targets at the moment for collection, because simply the data is very limited at the moment. From research we completed in the Scotland, Ireland, Norway, and Greenland, again, the picture is very fragmented. The different approaches to waste management, to collection in those different countries. And the overall systems in place differ significantly. There is no common system. So we're really at a stage of still on a lot of these issues to do the waste fishing nets, at a data collection or information stage, and we're way off knowledge, insight, and wisdom. So fishing nets, ropes, components, and peripherals. So we, getting into this issue more, what we realized there was a whole series of materials that are involved in that fishing gear, from the polymers through to metals and rubber and all sorts of different components. So, fishing gear can look like this. Um, oh, something's gone wrong here. Thanks, sorry. But also it includes other, simple components like this. So it's a more complex product, a fishing net than you'd originally thought. And also that's expanded further once you look at aquaculture nets and the material that is used for, fish farming, for example. So the challenge is, how can you use that waste fishing gear to create new eco-innovative opportunities? And broadly, I classify this into 6 areas, and this is very, very broad. And that is from, so we think about services and products. So it is services to help repair nets. And what we found is in various ports, there are specialist repair services, and those generally get used where the nets are larger, and even some manufacturers will take back the nets and repair and resell. And that's particularly when those nets are some of those larger nets. So, what we found is some of those large fishing nets are maybe up to beyond 300,000 euros. So there's a lot of economic value in those nets. And at lower level down, we've found the artisanal fishermen will be, heavily involved in their own self-repair of the nets. Secondly, reuse of fishing nets into various products. And we're seeing, an increase in that, but also a lot of, what I would term interesting examples that are not yet commercial products. So things like, some of you may have seen, for example, people experimenting with making volleyball nets and things like this. I haven't yet seen any cricket nets or any football nets or any hockey nets, but maybe that's a business opportunity. Maybe there are also opportunities related to construction, nets for construction. What we've seen mostly is small volume, more consumer-related products, and I'll come back to that. We also, in the reports, one of our other reports in Circular Ocean, documented, products from that are on the market from various manufacturers. It is smaller than you think. What we also found is at least one specialist reverse logistics company who collects nets and then will take those nets primarily for chemical recycling, and perhaps mechanical recycling, although that's less clear. There are 2, major recyclers, or relatively major recyclers of fishing nets. One called Plastics Global that uses mechanical recycling techniques, and is based in Denmark. And one that's called Aquafil that use chemical recycling, and they claim to produce filament from a de- and repolymerization process that is as good as new. And there are others who have looked at the market and are starting to move into the market. One, I believe, is Container Service in Norway, who's also producing pellets. And then there is a range of products that are being produced, some of which we'll come on to. And then some people are even experimenting with, could you actually break down the polymers from the nets into, oil that may be used, say, for fishing fleets. Not necessarily the best in the environmental hierarchy, but still for, challenged fishing communities, maybe that's another option. So some reuse examples. So here's, a consumer product, Italian designers selling these shoes for maybe about 200 euros, and now have got through their first phase and now are going through their startup looking for money to grow the business. So effectively, they're shaping the nets using design. This is BraceNet. They're a German company that effectively are taking the ropes and then using those ropes for bracelets and necklaces and other products. One are called Regen. That's sort of regeneration from the chemical recycling process, as I mentioned. Aquafil has developed this EcoNile fiber that is now being used increasingly by a number of swimwear designers and others who are using the fiber to make in clothing, and so they're starting to specify the second life fibers rather than new nylon. But it's also going into carpet tiles and other products. Also socks, swimwear, as I mentioned. Recycling. So we've got a number of companies, including Plastics Global. I hear a couple more have just entered the webinar. Please stay muted, and there will be opportunities to ask questions in the chat box. So moving onwards. So there are a number of companies now starting to produce pellets from the materials recycling of the fishing nets. That includes Plastics Global and I believe Container Service in Norway. So then those pellets can then be used in injection molding, produce products. So I'll come onto a case study of Burio, who are using their own injection molding equipment to use the pellets to produce a range of products. So theoretically, at least one could actually produce simple plastic products from waste fishing nets. So like I showed you right at the beginning, maybe some of those simple plastic components that go into fishing nets, or maybe some simple plastic fishing boxes that you see at port sides. In effect, you could produce these out of fishing nets. I see no reason for that. I don't believe anybody's done it yet, but this could be an interesting circular approach. So as I said there, maybe you could produce these components as well. We've seen various people experimenting with 3D printing and filament from fishing nets. And we have a company called Fishy Filaments in Cornwall in the southwest of Europe, southwest of UK, who are producing, their business is producing filaments for others to use that filament to produce products. And I'll come back to them. They're an interesting company because they very successfully crowdfunded to get their business off the ground. So in terms of how you start your business, that's an interesting example. And we'll have some other examples later on about how companies have used crowdfunding to kick their businesses off. So very quickly, a quick example of one interesting company who are US Chilean, Burio, and they effectively have developed a model where they work with very closely with fishermen in Chile to collect and clean the fishing nets, and then they distribute the nets to their factory in Santiago and shred and pelletize, and then they produce a range of products. They've got a very interesting true triple bottom line model in the sense of a sustainable triple bottom line is they work with the fishermen, as I mentioned, and a percentage of the sale of the product goes back into projects in the communities. And then we have the environmental benefit of reutilizing those waste nets, and then the economic benefit in the sense that they are, have a business and employing people. So their key, and their iconic product is the skateboard. It's not 100% from the nets, but there's a small proportion of rubber in there because they need, they need that sort of give in the skateboard, or else it would just crack and break. They've also produced sunglasses. They produce frisbees for the Jack Johnson music tour. They produce fins for surfboards. They've even, worked on this Jenga game. To produce, components for the game that's about raising awareness of the problem of fishing nets. And then they produce sufficient number of pellets that they're then selling the pellets onto other companies. So they, for example, my understanding is they've sold pellets onto the company, they supply pellets to Human Scale, who are then producing office chairs using those waste polymers. And this is a really interesting opportunity in terms of product differentiation. How many office chairs could you claim come from waste fishing nets? So we have an opportunity for any quick questions, or if not, please put anything into the chat box, or if nothing immediately is coming to mind, please keep your questions and we can pick them up later in the webinar. So I don't see any very specific questions yet, so I'll move on. Try and get the technology working. So now just a little bit of theory before we go back into the practicalities of things. Traditionally, we've had the sort of life cycle of products, the so-called cradle to grave life cycle, and in this instance, we're extracting, primarily the polymers, but also other materials in constructing gear for fin fishing and aquaculture fishing, if you like. So we're extracting those raw materials, we're then manufacturing and assembling, also packaging, distributing, using, and then sending to landfill. And what designers should be doing is starting to think about how they reduce the environmental impact through each of the life cycle stages, both in terms of energy use, materials use, for example, water, chemicals, etc. So, for example, in this instance, because fishing gear is primarily a passive product, it doesn't use electricity in the use phase, it's about materials thinking. And indeed, there are, I understand, gear technologists who are involved in the development of fishing gear. And design is important, or the design stage is important, because 80% of a product's environmental impact is determined at the design stage. So if you're not thinking about design for repairability or second life at that early stage, it's not going to happen. So we need to be starting to think about how we move from that linear so-called take-make waste economy to this more circular approach that I've exemplified in a book that I've produced called Designing for the Circular Economy. That's a much broader book. It's about keeping the value for as long as, or it's about maximizing the value in products, components and materials for as long as possible in economic and social systems. So it's about value creation and retention. So this idea of circular economy is very important. And we have the idea of designing for the biological economy, the technical economy. And ostensibly, the fishing nets now fall into the technical economy because they're primarily derived from polymers. From my background research early on in the project on this, there seemed to be a shift towards polymers in fishing nets in the 60s. Prior to that, there were a range of other materials used in fishing nets. We may start to see, perhaps as a result of the, new business models emerging associated with the producer responsibility schemes emerging in Europe and Canada, some companies might start to see opportunities for, non-technical materials in fishing nets. So again, what are some of the things that one can think about in terms of circularity in fishing gear? Well, maybe one could start to think about renting the gear, so extending the life of, and utilization of the gear, through rental or sharing models. Maybe one could build in much more robust repair systems. Maybe there could be, at the end of the first life of nets, a deliberate opportunity to enable second life of the nets into other product categories. Maybe we should be looking at opportunities for remanufacturing the nets, or if we design the nets to be modular, and we remove the modules that, for example, are torn, can we reaffix those patches to the nets? I understand to some extent that already happens, but this is very poorly documented. This I understand from I believe it was the first stakeholder meeting of different stakeholders in this area in Ireland that I attended maybe about 2 months ago. So this patching of nets already happens to some extent. Then you've got, at the end of the first life, you've got the materials from the nets that, as I mentioned before, maybe that then could be pelletized or produced into filament, that then could be manufactured or 3D printed into products. So, there are various things that can be done, thinking more circularly, if you like. And if one's starting to think about how we might create products from the nets or services or new business models, there's a sort of process that one needs to think about. Well, how would you collect the fishing nets? How would you produce? How would you sell and distribute? How would people potentially use those products? And what are the opportunities for product life extension? So one can collect the nets, maybe from the open sea, maybe in port areas, directly from beaches, or maybe setting up alliances with scientific and other vessels and divers who actually know where the waste nets are. Also, what we found is that often what we found, I don't know about often, but I understand it does exist, that nets and gear are stored in ports and harbour areas, and sometimes that is because they've not identified a waste disposal route. So there is some storage in the nets, and particularly in Iceland, there is huge landfilling of nets, and that isn't just polyethylene, polypropylene, but also nylon as well. So, one could, in the production and assembly, one can look at repair, reuse, recycling, and remanufacturing, as mentioned before. So you can assemble the products, you can manufacture it, and then you need to think about, after you've collected the material, you've made the product, how you're going to sell it. So you're going to sell it through local chains, local retail chains. Maybe you're going to sell it online. Maybe even you can look at collaborative sales with other smaller, companies or designers. But also maybe you might even think about, retail chains. If you're looking at a bigger market, or you see a bigger market for your product. And then you also need to think about are the products that you make from the waste gear, pinfish or shellfish, is it a product that's going to be owned? Is it going to be rented? Or is it going to be leased? Is it going to be a more service-based product? So there are examples of products or service-based models where people are offering, to actually, it's more of a tourism service where people provide a boat, and then people will go out and start to fish plastics from the ocean. Now that's been so far seemingly plastic packaging, but could there be another service model about removing fishing nets in some form? And also, other business opportunities might be the businesses associated with the use phase. So, repair and maintenance of the nets, for example. And I'll be going into more detail in this. This is just really just an overview at the moment. So, in terms of thinking about product life extension of those fishing nets, so again, to enable the materials and components in the product of fishing gear to have life extension in the existing format. One can, utilize repair services. One could, try and design that gear to be easier to disassemble using, for example, that patching approach. And one may do this through a remanufacturing model where the nets come back in, and maybe those modules are repaired and replaced and then resold. And one may also look at 3D printing through filament as a way to perhaps produce maybe those modules, maybe to reutilize the materials from the nets as well. So some simple product options, that could be business opportunities, businesses to repair, maintain, and resell the nets. Simple reuse-based models, so that's football goals, bags, etc. Recrafting the nets, so working with crafting communities, maybe to make bags or accessories, necklaces, etc. On a larger scale, looking at manufacturing, maybe injection molding, as per the Burio example. Maybe there are also recycling, materials recycling business opportunities, mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, and maybe other peripheral service areas, which also include shredding, and even providing a shredding service for the nets may be a new opportunity. So Q&A, and I see I have one question here. What is typically the prime motivator for fishermen vessels? And this is from Keith. Motivator for fishermen vessels, companies, etc., to return the nets, each of the manufacturer or the recycler. Well, from our knowledge, and I must say it is quite the research in this area is quite limited. So in terms of returns, it seems to be at a larger scale. Some net manufacturers offer, a service to repair the nets that they will repair and then resell. So that's for the larger fishing vessels. To a large extent, those take-back services really don't exist at the moment. What we see is particularly, for example, Norvia who's this reverse logistics company from Norway. They've seemingly set up business deals in ports and other areas where they will collect the waste fishing nets from the ports, and then they would take them for chemical recycling through the aquaculture, the aquafill process to produce the ECONYL fibers. So the whole take-back system is quite new in that sense, and still a significant proportion of the waste gear is either going to landfill or being incinerated or ending up in the oceans, sadly. But that may well be set to change with the new regulations, the new producer responsibility schemes that will be coming in Europe over the next 3 to 5 years, and also over a similar period in Canada. So I'll move now on unless there's any quick questions now. So I don't see any. So please keep your questions coming in as Keith sent in there. So I can now get more into some sort of practical thinking. So if you've got a product or a new business model or service idea or concept related to waste fishing gear, the next stages are things you'll need to think about. They won't give you any magic bullets, but they'll give you some thoughts that you'll need to address in taking your idea forward or your concept. So firstly, what is your concept? Is it a new business model? Is it a product, a service, or is it a product service combination? Write it down, get it down on a piece of paper, start to think it through. Are you focusing on premium quality and higher price, or is it generic and lower price? So, for example, the Badura shoes, I would consider that to be quite premium price, 200 euros, or is it a lower price product, which is probably something like the bracelet, the necklaces using the fishing rope? Are you focusing on a product that's using high quality craftsmanship, maybe manual processes, or you're looking at industrial production? So again, the bracelet, the bracelet guys, I think work with handicapped or disabled to make their products in some sort of quasi charity form. Or are you looking at an industrial process like injection molding, like Burio? So what is your ambition for growing your company? You're looking at a small-scale workshop? Are you looking at job creation? You're looking at job production, batch, or industrial flow production? So what is the ambition of your business, and what scale are you looking at? Most of what we've found in the market so far is really much more specialized and at a job/batch level, and probably the closest we have to industrial really is Burio, but that may be small scale manufacturing. I'm not quite sure of the number of units they're producing yet, but most of it is quite small scale at the moment. So will the fishing gear be, will the waste fishing gear be a key feature of the product, or will it be a secondary feature? Will it just be reusing the material, or will you be looking to feature the fact that it is a reuse of fishing gear? So what is your value proposition? What value are you going to deliver to the customers? And who are your customers? Are you thinking about business to consumer, business to business, or business to government? So by that I mean, could you produce, products that are sold to maybe to local government that practice green procurement? So maybe products in the construction sector, for example. So how does your product differentiate itself from other products on the market? What is your USP? Could your USP be like the human scale chairs, that it's a Me Too market, but you are using polymers from the fishing gear? So that might be a differentiator in a sense. Not very complicated, but again, if it's done right, could be your differentiator. Are there any other competitive offerings in the market, or by including the material or components or reuse elements from the gear, could that be a competitive offering in the market? And what type of business model is relevant for your offering? So here's a summary of some business models related to some of the products, and also some illustrative business models that might be utilized in this space. So circular business models. So, Burio, as I've mentioned before, they're making the pot, they're producing, products using injection molding from recycled polymers. Mud Jeans, this is an illustrative example. They are renting jeans. So could you produce, jeans using, for example, the Econile fiber, which is reutilizing the polymers, if you like. That is also, for example, or other form of clothing, for example, that is using the Econile fiber or other fibers that might be being commercially now produced. And maybe you could rent that clothing to millennials. Another illustrative example is, could you, Andesso is a carpet company or produce carpet tiles, and they offer, a service deal that includes maintenance and repair. Now, perhaps a better example in this space would be Interface Floor. Interface Floor have got a long history going back to the 90s about developing a more circular approach that was driven by Ray Anderson at the top. And they have a carpet tile product that is using again Econile fiber in the carpet tiles. So could you look at a carpet tile product or something similar where you also offer maintenance and repair of those carpet tiles? Novia, who I mentioned earlier, they have a reverse logistics company, so they will collect and deliver waste fishing nets to manufacturers or recyclers. And Fishy Filaments, who I mentioned, who have developed filament for 3D printing from waste nets. Another business model might be an experiential business model, and that might be included as part of the business. And this is perhaps at a wider scale, and just is really illustrative. Aquafil apparently have a process where they offer guided tours to let customers experience the production process. I mean, that is in the US apparently. However, the precise de- and repolymerization process is somewhat guarded by Aquafil. So I wonder to what extent they're actually showing that process. Maybe they, the early stage of it is not included, but maybe it's actually the production of the end production of the fibers that they show. Companies like The Body Shop in cosmetics had that approach going back to the 10 or 20 years ago, opening up the manufacturing process. An illustrative model, again, Plastic Whale. This is a company that offer events where people can take part in the collection of waste plastics from, I think, the canals in the Netherlands. But I believe there are others now offering a similar service. And again, the idea, as I mentioned earlier, is could you, look at something similar related to fishing nets? Maybe there's also other opportunities, linked to, for groups of divers or something. Another illustrative example is Maple XO, and they'll offer maker workshops where customers can participate hands-on in crafting a product. So could you produce a maker workshop, for example, to produce necklaces or bracelets or other types of products from the waste fishing gear and ropes? Precious plastics, again, an illustrative example, but based on a pilot as well. So this is an open-sourced series of blueprints that enable an individual to build a series of products or a series of kit to shred and injection mold waste plastics. So it's 3 types of products that you can manufacture in waste plastics. And indeed, we were involved in a project called Project Net Worth, where they were able to use that open source, in effect, technology to produce, a handle that could be used in various products. OpenDesk, again, an illustrative example to take products forward. So there's a platform that charges for selling finished products and customized products from local makers. So quite simply, if you made a product, you could, add that product to that website. And there is a sort of collective selling of more localized products through that website. Similar to one of the other examples, there is a company called Afraid Not. I always thought that was a heavy metal band, but no, it's a company in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. Basically, what he provides is workshops and training and support to make rugs for the home from thicker ropes. So this will be mats and rugs, or it's more mats rather than rugs. So he will help you design and make your mat for the home or for the office, and then he will charge you a fee to enter that workshop. And then, as far as I understand it, then you take that mat away with you. But all of those are made from waste ropes. Then you have social enterprise business models, and again, you have Burio, who are working with the local community, fishermen, to then take as key part of their business model. You have Healthy Seas, who are involved in making some of those the socks using the Econol fiber, and they, I believe, have a non-profit structure, charitable/social business model. Then you have other business models that are set up by Planet Love Life and Ruby Moon that are for profit, but they donate a percentage of profits back into good causes, such as female entrepreneurship programs in countries in transition. Then you've got collaborative business models, which link and are similar to the previous one. So BraceNet, that I mentioned in Germany, they also work. They have partnerships with with fishermen, I believe, but also with disabled people to create their products. And again, interface floor through the Networks project. This is carpetage using the Econol fiber. They collaborate with a whole series of different organizations in Southeast Asia, including fishermen, to collect the nets and then supply the nets through the Econol process. So there's a range of business models that one can think about in terms of taking products forward. So I see a question that's emerged in the chat box. Blue Circular Economy is a regional organisation, Scotland, Ireland. Who do we need to contact for our respective locations in Germany? Sadly, we can only directly support SMEs in Scotland, Ireland, Norway, Greenland, Sweden, and other parts of Scandinavia. It's a European funded project, but there is no similar project in Germany. There was a project that was run by WWF in the Baltic region, and I would suggest you would contact WWF Germany to find about that project. But sadly, within our project, what we are doing is getting a lot of global interest in it, but we're only directly able to support particularly SMEs in the region. That doesn't stop people attending the webinars and won't stop people attending the conferences. So, for example, we have a conference in Iceland in April, where there'll be a range of expert speakers and others. So, but sadly, directly in the project, we can't help you in Germany. I'm sorry about that. So I would contact WWF Germany to find out about that previous project. So I'll move swiftly on as I don't see any further questions. I'll try and move swiftly on. Right, so getting right down into the detail now. So how are you going to source your waste? Let's call it waste gear. I'll use that for short for the fishing nets, ropes, components, and peripherals. So how are you going to source your finfish gear or your shellfish gear. So some questions you'll need to ask yourself. So how are you going to set up a network or system for collection? Remembering back to those points where you could collect, the fishing gear. So it may be getting more directly involved with those organizations, or maybe developing a direct partnership with the port area or harbor area. As mentioned here, what about partnering with harbor authorities, waste companies, NGOs, and or the significant number of citizen-driven beach clean operations that now exist? Before I got involved in this area, I really wasn't so aware of this, but there's now many different groups around the world that are driven by citizens who are cleaning the beaches and collecting waste plastics, including the nets and the ropes, some of which are reusable. So key point, how are you going to clean that fishing gear to remove the toxins, the chemicals, and the debris, the organic debris, particularly from the gear that's been used for bottom trawling? So often those are very contaminated, and you need high pressure hoses and other approaches to both clean the nets, but also we found through experimentation in 3D printing, also then to dry the nets, because my understanding is a number of those polymers are hygroscopic, so they absorb water. So unless you dry them, when you put them into the, you heat the polymers, either in injection molding or in 3D printing, you get the emission of, if that's the right word, water and salt, which can screw the production process as such, or the printing process. So you need to clean and dry. Well, of course, you already have, if you have an idea for a clothing product or another type of product, you could simply buy an EcoNile fiber, the second life fiber from the fishing nets, or any other fibers that might exist. But at the moment, the most visible, provider of those fibers are EcoNile through Aquafil. So R&D, research and development. Do you have the necessary skills to build your prototype, to build your, your demonstration, your prototype, to really, take your idea forward? Should you collaborate with a research lab or a university, or for example, a makerspace or a hackerspace or a fab lab? So you might consider partnering with others to get access to the technology. Again, a similar route. It may be others have the technology you might need to produce your prototype, or, if you get beyond the prototyping to scale, it may be rent time on machines rather than invest fully in the kit. Consider how you could access existing equipment from existing companies. So plastic, you might buy, work with existing shredders of plastics to see if they could shred the gear, and perhaps plastic molders, that might be based in harbor areas or port areas, if that's where you are based or where you're thinking of a business, i.e. close to the source of the nets. So consider the feasibility of 3D printing. Could you again buy fishy filaments and produce 3D print products from those filaments? Could you consider reconfiguring, building a precious plastics machine and using that to produce a product? So you build your own manufacturing kit. So and what we've done in a report in our Circular Ocean project is we documented many products. But as I mentioned before, there are products such as the Vadura shoes and boots, Axiom, which are cycle bags, that I believe are reusing, the yarn from the fishing nets, but they may also, there is certainly one other company that's using crab pots, as bags for cycling. And you might take inspiration from other areas. So Elvis and Cressy, this is an illustrative example. They produce bags from waste fire hoses, and they now sell those into as a premium product into Harrods. So that's almost verging on upcycled products. So marketing, who is your target audience? Is it business to consumers, business to business, or business to government? And again, if you're looking at B2C, what's your market segments there? Could it be tourists related to areas around port or coastal areas? Could it be surfers? Could it be greener consumers? Awareness. So how will you raise awareness about your product or your service? How will you evaluate the environmental claims associated with your value proposition? One area that I must state is that I think there's going to be a tightening up of green claims associated with products that are utilizing fishing nets and ropes. There are products on the market at the moment that are claiming to use fishing nets, but it's unclear if that's 10% of the waste polymers that are being used or 0.001%. So be careful about the claims you make if you're looking at mixing with other types of waste plastics. Because I believe that will be tightened up. So then you need to think about basic things. Will customers how will customers purchase your products through online sites, through stores, etc., through pop-up shops, whatever. And then how will the product be delivered? And then how will you service the customers? And indeed, going back a little bit with the question is that as a point I missed is I believe that Bureo, if you break your skateboard, they will then send you a new skateboard if you return your skateboard for a discounted fee or maybe for free. I'm not absolutely certain, but I know they're very serious about a closed loop model. So branding, what is the key brand messages and the core story? What is your story behind setting up your product? How should you communicate your vision, your values, and story through, for example, photographs, videos, and different stories about you and your colleagues, the people that founded the firm? How are you going to involve employees, customers, and other stakeholders in the brand? Have you considered co-branding with other relevant products? And some do this in this space. So how much money do you have? How much money do you need to take your product forward based on a longer term plan? And where are you going to get the money from? Self-funding, have you built up a nest egg? Have you got friends and family? Overdraft credit cards? Are you looking at bank loans, venture capital, angel investors, share ownership, startup or incubator programs, and or crowdfunding, for example? And I'll touch on crowdfunding in a moment. Bureo, for example, as far as I understand it, their funding has not come from any conventional funding. It's come from venture investing from Patagonia. It's come from crowdfunding and also incubator programs. So there may be, in a sense, unconventional ways to, fund your business. And before I go into crowdfunding, just some quick thoughts about how you might fire up your business in the beginning. So you might, run a crowdsourcing campaign or hackathon to rapidly develop your ideas. You might create prototypes from your ideas with makerspaces. So you might join a makerspace or a hackerspace or a fab lab, or perhaps set it up as a student project or something. Perhaps use pop-up shops with your prototypes to get early stage feedback from potential customers and users. So, set up a pop-up stand somewhere where there's traffic, people traffic to gain feedback. Launch your idea through social media, and also consider running a crowdfunding campaign to get supporters and to test the commercial viability of your product. So, any questions at this stage, or I'll move swiftly on to the section on crowdfunding, which is moving towards the end. It looks like I may run a little bit over time, but hopefully not too much. If I see no questions, I will move swiftly on. But again, if questions come to you, please feel free to bring them in at the end. So crudely, there are 4 types of crowdfunding. One is donation-based. One is reward-based, where backers receive something tangible for their investment. That might be, the product, some early stage, versions of the product in response for the contribution. So it's an early stage pre-sale opportunity. You see this, for example, in terms of downloading movies, where you can, pre-book a movie. So it's a similar sort of idea. Then you've got loan-based platforms that are using peer-to-peer loan systems. And then you have equity-based crowdfunding, where private investors have the opportunity to invest in unlisted companies or early-stage companies. So there are different types, and you need to be clear about what model you're going for. And some of the crowdfunding platforms are here. Kickstarter, many you've heard of: Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Patreon, Funding Circle, Crowdcube. But there are other specialist crowdfunding operators now emerging, and a number of ones that specialize in the green area. So what are some of the things you need to put together in developing a successful crowdfunding campaign? Thinking about the story, video pictures, the target amount, the campaign length, rewards, pre-marketing, and then running the program itself. So, the story. What is your story? Why are you pursuing this project? What's the story? What is the world behind the brand? What's the story behind not just the project, but the product itself? And also, what's the purpose of your campaign? And who are you? What is your backstory? Videos and pictures. So research indicates that that crowdfunding campaigns that include videos are more successful. So using a video format to make the campaign more personal and informal. And videos should generally be no longer than 3 minutes. So they should clearly explain, the background, the objective, and what you're trying to achieve. And, you should think about building a website, and on that website you have your video or videos, and then you also have photographs and other material, to help with your campaign overall. Target amount, where you should think about, again, going back to the beginning, how much you're trying to raise. Is this for the business? Is it for one product to kickstart the business? Is it an existing business where you want to, crowdfund the development of one product from the gear? So the average pledge per backer is about 50 to 100 euros. The average target amount for a campaign is between 5 and 10,000 euros. And there are different choices between crowdfunding campaigns, some that are based on all or nothing. You achieve the target amount or not. And if you don't, you go back to, square one, or a flexible approach. And in a report, the backup report we did on this on eco-innovation related to the fishing gear within the Circular Ocean Project, we detail this in more detail. So the campaign length, so typically it should be 30 to 90 days, and you should consider your resources to put into the campaign, and choose whether you're going to have a short intensive program or if it's going to be longer. You should also consider rewards for people that invest in your crowdfunding campaign. That might be as simple as a handwritten thank you letter. It may be something, more creative. And if you're getting higher value in, it might be other types of rewards, to say thank you very much, and encourage them maybe to invest more. So positive reinforcement, if you like. So pre-marketing camp, you need to make a plan to target potential backers and promote your project. You need to make a list, and reach out to people, organization, bloggers, media. And before that, you obviously need to write those down and think who you're going to approach and how you're going to approach them. You're going to approach them by email, you're going to phone them up, etc., etc. Before you launch your crowdfunding campaign, you should perhaps start a blog about your project, or start feeding out information, perhaps under a hashtag in social media, and indeed get a Twitter account associated with your project or your product. So have plenty of social media content available before your crowdfunding. So have a clear plan in place. So once you set your campaign up, post daily updates on social media, consider a small budget to boost your social media. So that might be, on Twitter or Facebook or whatever mechanism, Instagram. So you might supplement existing free media with paid-for media that is more targeted. Reach out and get new contacts throughout the whole campaign and get these guys on a database or on an Excel sheet. Also make use of multiple promotional tools to promote your campaign. Don't just use Twitter. Maybe use telemarketing, produce leaflets, speak at events, etc., etc. And make sure you keep your backers engaged in your program. Maybe develop a simple newsletter that maybe you send out, updating people, or just a bulletin each, week, each month, or whatever. Here's some examples of successful crowdfunding campaigns in the gear area. So this is a company called The Other Danish Guy. They had a product using underwear that was producing underwear, I assume, from Econile. They used the Indiegogo campaign, reward-based approach, 230 funders pledging nearly $47,000 US, well over the target amount. Burio, developed a campaign for those sunglasses I showed earlier on Kickstarter. Nearly 1,400 funders pledging, $180,000, way over their target amount. Healthy Socks, that again I mentioned earlier, who again producing socks using the Econile fiber. They got 190 funders pledging nearly 18,000 euros over their target amount. And Fishy Filaments, who are using crowd campaign, which was an equity-based approach, they got over 400 funders pledging over 200,000, which was, well over their target amount of 140,000 pounds. So there are a range of things you need to think about if you decide to take a product forward. Also, an issue to consider, again, if your business is based in a port area or a harbor area or a port city area, is don't forget about your local ecosystem. In your local vicinity, you may form connections with the local authority, form connections with the fishermen, form connections with maker spaces. make sure you're looking at other partnership or collaboration. Also, maybe with plastics molders and shredders. So, who is sitting in your local ecosystem who you could partner with or collaborate in taking your idea forward? Again, as a reminder, we produced this general booklet on eco-innovation that was designed for startups that's further been evolved into looking at fishing gear. What we also did through the Circular Ocean project is that we ran a series of hackathons, and within those hackathons, a whole series of new concepts were developed for new products and fishing gear, all of which were open sourced on the website. So if you're interested in getting that area in the area and you haven't necessarily thought about your product, by all means have a look at what we came up with in the process there. All I ask is that if you decide to move forward, you follow through and with the email contacts so that the designer's original concept are kept informed. Many of those were happy to let their ideas be open sourced, but it'd be great if we could connect people up. So basically, that's the end of the webinar. And now I have a few questions. So Maris, very interesting. We cannot really stay longer. Fine. Keith, sorry I missed the beginning of the webinar. Will these slides be shared afterwards? They will probably be shared, the actual full webinar video, through the Blue Circular Economy website. There is already one up from the previous session, but each one of these, so that's if you hunt on Blue Circular Economy, you should be able to find the previous webinar. The webinars, are broadly the same, but obviously, well, not obviously, I probably add new information on different ones, but, it will be broadly the similar. So eventually this one will go up there, but there is one up there already. So there's, and within the Blue Circular Economy project, we have these webinars. Also, if anyone is based in Galway or in Ireland, or in Ireland, or in Alesund in Norway, we are going to be hosting some broader stakeholder engagement workshops to bring together different stakeholders in the issue, and particularly looking at the concept of a new, lab idea to take the products forward. We're also going to be running a conference in Iceland, and if you are, within the geographical area of the MPA region, and you are an SME, less than 250 employees, we are able to provide one-to-one support. But unfortunately, that's only if you are in the region. There is also going to be a range of other work going on the project on, for example, new circular business models, and a range of other materials. So, you might want to sign up to the newsletter that I think is available from the Blue Circular Economy project. And again, for anyone who would like to follow up with anything specific, please feel free to email me with short, succinct emails. Would be well received. Would be great to hear any quick feedback. Was the workshop useful? Were there any key points that you think should be included? Any quick feedback would be great. Or any final questions? Great. Was it useful? Was it interesting? Any feedback? Will replacing nylon with biodegradable polymers for fishing nets can be a way out? It's quite a tricky area, because I think already some have tried to look at this, and what you've got is the problem of the microfibers. So some of these biopolymers are producing these very thin microfibers, which again is becoming, increasing work by manufacturers on trying to limit that, and also there's going to be regulation coming in time. So it's not easy. So another couple of questions, I think. Sorry, I just moved back up. So thanks for the feedback. It was helpful, enjoyed it. It was interesting, and lots of new information. Thank you. So unless there is any further feedback or any further questions, what I suggest you do is perhaps have a look at the Blue Circular Economy website. I'll just also tap in here now the previous project that includes all of our reports on things like the products. I'll try and do it anyway. The products that are in the market. We also have a report there on our trials that we did on 3D printing. We have also reports on this concept of the Innovation Lab, which we're now starting to look at in Ireland and Norway. But unless there are any further questions, I'd like to thank you all very much, and please feel free to recommend it to any other colleagues. We'll be running it, as I say, either monthly or bi-monthly until the end of the project. That is about in another 2 years. So, and hopefully, if I don't hear from you, maybe you'll see it at one of the events. And if not, good luck with whatever direction you're taking on this. So, thank you very much, and good evening.